Hello, everyone. My name is Tara Seplavy, and you're tuning into the very first and hopefully not very last episode of the Pink, Blue, and White podcast. Pink, Blue, White podcast. Look at that. I already messed up my own name. So right off the top, I'm going to dive in a little bit about who I am and what this podcast is all about. So as I mentioned, my name is Tara Seplavy. I'm a cyclist, bike industry lifer, really a champion for all things diversity and inclusion in the sport and business of bikes. And I've ridden and raced bikes of all sorts, from downhill enduro bikes to road and cross, which is what I do a lot of now. And I've even dabbled a little bit in BMX, and we probably shouldn't talk about that because I'm not really good at that. But so Pink, Blue, White is what I have dubbed my freelance brand, and kind of just all the other little side projects that I do. And that name is something really personal to me. And that name comes from the colors of the trans flag and trans pride flag, with pink is the color that's most often associated, I guess, in at least American culture or English speaking cultures for girls, quote unquote. And blue is the color for boys, and white represents kind of that transition or the convergence of the space that's in between. And this Pink, Blue, White podcast it's going to be a different setup than pretty much all the other podcasts that we see out there in the bike space. And what I want this to be is each and every episode is to have it be more topic driven, have it meant to be fact-based, informative, centered on the voices and lived experiences of the people who are in the activity, sport, and business of cycling. So with that said, we'll kind of just jump right into podcasty type stuff here. But first, we'll do a little plug type stuff here. But since Pink, Blue, White is a new podcast and we're just diving into some of the panels we're going to be putting together, if you who are our listeners at home, in the car, wherever you are, would like to suggest a topic for us to discuss or volunteer to be a panelist on an episode, feel free to drop an email. Just send that over to info@pinkbluewhite.cc. That's .cc, so just make sure you pay attention to that, or just slide into any of our DMs on social media, and we'll get that rolling. So the inaugural topic for the very first topic for the Pink, Blue, White podcast, it's something, as I was saying before, it's something deeply personal to me and meaningful. Today, the day that we're sitting here actually doing this recording is it's March 31st. It's Trans Day of Visibility, or TDOV as we call it within the community. It's an annual event that it's centered on celebrating the achievements and accomplishments of trans people in everyday life. And part of my everyday life and part of all our panelists' everyday life is riding bikes and racing bikes. So Trans Day of Visibility is also super important to me personally. This is the anniversary of when I came out as trans. So 4 years ago, I decided to bare my soul to the world, so to say, and come out publicly as trans. And since then, it's been a rocky road, I'm not going to lie, but at the same time, it's been really rad. And I've met some amazing folks. And some of those folks are people who I've invited to be guests here today. So where can I start with all this is, when I started this idea for a podcast a couple months back, I was really thinking about ways that we could highlight the accomplishments of some just really rad trans folks, specifically trans folks, because that's kind of what was on my mind at the time, and just thinking about doing this as a one-off, but thinking about just really awesome rad trans folks in the cycling community specifically. And well, over the past couple of weeks, if you're paying attention to the news, specifically if you're paying attention to the news here in the United States, is trans rights, and very specifically trans sports and trans athletes have yet again have become the focus. And recent anti-trans, anti-LGBTQ legislation in Arkansas, Mississippi, Tennessee has hit the books. And I'm not going to lie, it sucks and it's scary and something that we're all fighting for and we're fighting against. And it's something we're going to talk about today a little bit. And so here to discuss the topic of trans representation in cycling, I've brought together just a really amazing panelist of guests and friends. A lot of these folks are my friends. I've known a lot of them either on social media or through the riding and racing scene for the last few years. So some are names that you might already know. If you follow bikes, even kind of remotely closely, you're going to notice a couple of these names. Others might be new to you, but every single one of these people here, they're here right now because they bring some just really excellent insights and abilities to have some discussion points to this. So I guess just leading off, I sound like with the baseball season starting tomorrow here in America, leading off, I sound like a baseball podcaster right there, a baseball broadcaster. So I'm going to start off with everybody. First, joining us from all the way down across the Pacific Ocean, way on the other side of the world, we have Kate Weatherly. And Kate is a two-time New Zealand downhill champion, national champion. And in 2019, did the most amazing thing, and something that I wish I could have done in my time riding and racing downhill bikes, is landed on the podium twice in UCI World Cups in Leogang and Laserheide, which is just amazing. So next, Christopher Hunt. And Chris is up in Vermont, where it's probably still cold and snowy, but Chris rides just a whole heck of a lot of bikes. And following Christopher on social media for the past couple of years, just seeing how much they care about bikes, and very specifically seeing how much they care about mountain biking and trail riding and things like that. And they're also a bike mechanic. And let's face it, if you're trans or you're queer in the world of bikes, bike mechanics are where a lot of us sort of end up gravitating towards. So also joining us today is one of my just best friends in bike world, and somebody who I have so much respect for, coming down out of Philly, Kieran Campbell. So I've met Kieran through the cyclocross race scene, and Kieran has ridden cyclocross. I don't know if he's still racing cyclocross, Kieran, but racing cyclocross, riding mountain bikes, does a whole lot of super long distance road rides and stuff like that. But a key thing, and one of the reasons that I brought them in today, was to talk about their involvement in youth cycling and some really important things there. And next, last but not least, very super special guest joining us today, have a junior racer, junior trans athlete, and just an amazing young woman, woman named Jessica. And she's seriously one of the raddest kids I've ever met. And we'll get a chance to meet Jessica and talk about what they're doing and just some of the things about, the realities of racing bike as a trans kid here in America. So I do also want to throw a couple of quick shout outs to a couple of people who I invited to the show but couldn't make it for various reasons. One of them, Chelsea Wolf, who is a pro elite BMX athlete. And Chelsea is currently out, or I think she's actually in transit right now. And that's why she can't join us, is she got stuck on a flight and is on her way back from USA Olympic team training camp. So hopefully we will see some trans representation out at the Olympics soon. And another one who I definitely want to just kind of throw out there is to thank, I'd asked a very important trans athlete to join us today, but her name is Michelle Dumaresque, and she is a hero to a lot of us who are in the trans community, but also in mountain biking, as being pretty much the first out professional trans athlete in the sport of mountain biking. And unfortunately, she's up there in the Great White North of Canada and doesn't have a secure type of internet connection that would enable her to do some live streaming and stuff like that. So she couldn't make it today, but I wanted to make sure I thanked her for coming along and helping me on my journey, we'll say. So, so now that I've taken up so much of everybody's time, I want to hear from everybody here. So since we're recording this on Trans Day of Visibility, and all the people who I have here on this panel, you're all visible trans people in the sport of cycling. I want to talk about, why is being visible so important? And I guess leading this off, let me pose this and let me ask Kate and say, Kate, why is visibility important, specifically for you, somebody who is not coming from American cycling culture, is coming from, cycling culture down in New Zealand? Why is being visible? Why is being an out trans athlete important to you?
Yeah, I think this has kind of been, I think, a really big discussion, that I've had kind of with myself and throughout my own journey about the importance of being out. And I talk about this a lot in, interviews I've done and just in general, that at least for me, being out and visible was really important because I was sort of aware that by being out and visible, I create space in a community and an environment where there maybe isn't always space for trans people and, gender non-conforming people.
Mm.
And as a result, for me to be out and to let people know that I'm trans and keep competing at a high level, it kind of creates an environment where people start to understand and be aware that, trans people are out there, we do exist. And for me, that was important because although I've had a lot of struggles, finding my place in the sport and kind of becoming the athlete that I am, I hope that by me being visible and being out, it makes it easier for people who are younger to go through the same experiences I have and maybe not face the pushback and the backlash that I have, that kind of thing. I think for me, that was a really important part of my coming out process and being visible, was letting people know that, hey, we do exist. And that if there are young trans people who also want to do what I've done, they can with maybe less pushback than what I've dealt with.
And I guess on the flip side of that, or not flip side of that equation, but flip side of the world is, and you're coming out as a trans woman and down in New Zealand. And I guess asking, Christopher, is you're out trans masculine person, and how I think a lot of times the discussion in cycling, it always tends to be about trans women, right? And why are we the discussion point? And I was going to ask Christopher as a trans masculine person, tell us a little bit about like why being visible as a trans male is important in bikes, and how that kind of maybe plays off of the, I guess we say, the trans feminine experience that some of us are seeing.
Yeah, I would echo a lot of what Kate said. At least like for me personally, my motivation to be an out trans person in general, and that just falls into bikes, is that I want people, especially the youth, young people, to know that trans people exist, and not only that we exist, but we're here to like to be there for them, and if I had even known that trans people existed when I was a kid, like,
oh yeah,
we've been blown. Like, I mean, things would have been so different, right? My whole entire experience. I didn't come out as trans until I was 26, 27. And so, I mean, a little bit later in my 20s. And so, but I knew on some fundamental level for a long time. And so if I had any of that visibility from people who were older than me, then, I think that would have fast tracked some of that. And then specifically in cycling, I think one of the big things in that, this is highlighted, I think, in a lot of the stuff that's happening in the United States, just having a voice and being able to go to bat, per se, for the youth, in cycling, and make sure that they get to participate, and just kind of like hold some of that weight for them.
Yeah, for sure. No, for sure. And I even feel like oddly, like there's, I didn't expect there to be like this pressure on me to do that. And I really feel it. Like, and I feel maybe some of this coming from me who's also, I'm a parent. And maybe there's some of that just parental kind of responsibility that I sometimes feel to protect all the kids and kind of be motherly like that. But I guess, I I guess asking the question to Jessica and saying, Jess, like you're a junior racer, junior athlete, and why is being visible important to you as a, as a kid, as a young athlete who's racing?
I just feel like I I didn't really have like I mean when I was much younger, because I've been out for like a while, but I feel like I didn't really know any. I mean, mainly I didn't know like any trans people, but especially not in like sports. Like,
Yeah.
I mean, like I feel like that like kind of made it extra hard for me to like be like kind of identify with it because I was like I love sports at the time. It was soccer. I was like obsessed with playing soccer, and I just like I think like having someone to like look up to that's like not like I feel like there's a lot of like people who you see in the media who are kind of already done. I mean, not done with their transition, but like like not like in like still in process, of like fighting with like doctors on like all sorts of stuff. So I feel like having like a role model like that would have been really helpful for me for just like everybody always says that it's gonna get better, but it doesn't seem like it, for and I feel
Yeah.
like yeah.
No, I understand, and yeah, and that's one of the reasons I said, like, off the top of the, talking before asking some questions is talking about Michelle Dumarisk, and the reason I bring up Michelle is Michelle's somebody who I knew well prior to me coming out, and I I leaned on her a little bit when way before I came out, like back when she was racing downhill, and because that I looked at that as being, this is somebody who's out there doing what I love and what I want to be doing and doing it out. And I saw the backlash that happened, and it turned me back. And yeah, it shouldn't have, and it did, but some of us go through ups and downs, and that is, I guess, part of all this journey that we're all on here. But I guess following up on that is, why not be stealth, right? Like the opposite of visibility is stealth and not being out, but not denying your trans existence. And I think there's a different component of visibility, and I wanted to ask some of y'all about that, and why visibility has, there's almost like this given that we're expected to be activists, or we're expected to be a mouthpiece for the trans community, the queer community. There are a lot of times where I just want to ride bikes. I just want to race bikes, and I'm tired of fighting on Twitter. You know what I mean? So I guess asking that question, like, why be visible in that sort of way, and why turn that around? But I don't know if anybody want to talk about that, but I'm not somebody who can be stealth like myself. Like, yeah, because I'm loud and boisterous, but also I think just I'm not going to be. I can't. I'm going to be visibly trans. It's just how some of it is. But I guess, and we brought it up a little bit, was to say, the topic du jour right now is what's happening down in Arkansas, and wanting to talk about that a little bit and ask, I guess specifically, hey, Jessica, you're a junior racer and you race cross specifically. If you wanted to tell us a little bit about your feelings about just what's happening down there in Arkansas, and specific to bike racing.
I mean, I've got to be honest, I've kind of not been paying attention, which is like,
oh, I'm jealous of you, actually.
Yeah, I mean, I feel so terrible, and I feel like so privileged to say that, because like I kind of am able to not pay attention to stuff like, I mean, also like I
Mhm.
probably just should have, like, knowing that this was gonna happen, I probably should have like really like done some like Google searching or something, but
No, I understand. So just to, and for any of the listeners at home who might be listening right now going, what the hell are these people talking about? But there's been a rash of anti-trans legislation specifically aimed at trans youth, and very specifically aimed at prohibiting young trans athletes from competing openly, and talking about invasive body testing and all this crazy stuff. And how that directly relates back to cycling is the 2022 cyclocross world championships are happening in the state where this stuff is the focal point. So I guess, with that, and just how, I guess, turning this around a little bit is to ask, to ask all of you, and who are those of us who are on the call here who are Americans, and say, examples like Kieran, how does some of this impact like what you're doing, and you're down in Philly, and you're very actively involved in the youth scene down in Philly, and I guess if you wanted to talk a little bit about that side of stuff. And
yeah, so let's see. There's so much. We do, the youth that I work with, we do like road races sometimes, obviously nothing right now because of COVID. And we also do cyclocross racing, and the youth are like, always really jazzed about it. I also run a cycling team here in Philly. So I'm pretty involved in like, kind of USAC races. I don't necessarily race at the elite level, but, seeing that kind of like, it's like it's just a punch in the gut kind of thing. You're just like, it's already, there's already so much, I have a hard time sometimes thinking about what I want to say.
No, it's understandable, especially right now. I get it. And a whole bunch of stuff in the background just fell down. That was kind of cool there. I didn't set this up. So, but anyway, what I guess, pivoting to something else there is just to talk about the fact that I guess for all of us here, and Christopher, feel free to jump in, Kate as well. And even though you're not American, is that the fact that we're sitting here, I hate to say it from a very, just kind of touched on, is we're very privileged, being the fact that we're up here in the north, or at least what's considered the more liberal bastions of the United States of America here. But we're a bit isolated from it, and the fact that we can't let our trans and queer friends down, who are down in who are down south and who are in the other states. It's not just down south. I shouldn't just say the South like that. But what can we do here, right? Like, what should we be doing? And what are some of the stuff that y'all are thinking about in relation to some of this, and just the daily grind of this is just happening and happening and happening. But here we are sitting in our little bubbles of privilege,
Yeah, I struggle with that a lot. I mean, because in Vermont, it has always been sort of that liberal, safe space for those of us who are up here. And I just want to be like, I'll just reach out and tell everyone just move to Vermont. It's great. It's great here. It's a little cold, but you get used to it. And sometimes we can vacation warm places. But what I have tried to do is just balance like what I can do, and what can I do is just continue to focus locally where I can make a difference. And for me here, I created the Pride Rides Vermont, and it's a local cycling club and nonprofit. And so one thing that has kind of turned into, at first I was just like, let's invite all the queer people to come ride bikes with us. I just want to ride bikes with all the queer people. And then And so, but then we did do some like social distance racing in the sort of cross country scene here, which is pretty small. The racing scene here is so tiny. There's no cyclocross. A little bit of cross country, and so we did this race event, and what I found was an opportunity to like to speak up for my non-binary friends and people who wanted to race there. And so there was an opportunity to create awareness. And even though this is like, everybody thinks of it as a very liberal and progressive place, there's still room to grow. And so I think just making sure, like for me, I just focus on those things that I can do here. And certainly spread that education. I mean, social media makes that easy to post about it and reach people who are a little bit farther away, and family and friends and whatnot who are maybe in places that could make a difference. Even in Maine, they had a bill that was pretty similar. That's up here in the Northeast, and I know people out there, and so just like spreading that awareness and
No, very true. And I guess, and some of it just kicked off even just to the north of where I am and to the south of where some of us here are too, is in Connecticut, right? And that's sort of that was actually the first sort of touch point for some of this in the States. I guess I'll pose this question to Kate, who's down in New Zealand on the other side of the world, where you almost all don't have COVID down there anymore. It's kind of interesting, but is to ask you from an outsider's perspective and what you're seeing through the media. What's your take, and what are you seeing down there from somebody who's an outsider looking into what's happening in the States right now?
Yeah, I think in New Zealand, we are incredibly privileged, to be in, I think you take the most liberal part of America and make it a bit more liberal, and then that's New Zealand. We have a, fairly left-leaning government. As a point of reference, when I first was going to come out and start racing as a woman in the women's field, I emailed Cycling New Zealand, who is sort of our governing body. They do all the cycling, work under the UCI here. And I spoke to them, and they basically went, okay, what do we do? And I said, use the same rule as the UCI and the IOC, because if I want to compete at a World Cup or anyone wants to compete in Olympics, they will need to abide by those same rules. And therefore, it's a good sort of starting point. And so they did that. And basically, throughout my transition and throughout my racing career, they've basically just said, they'd come back to me and get my opinion on rule changes. And, there was recently a trans woman here who was trying to compete and hadn't medically transitioned, which was quite a difficult situation for them to try and deal with. So I gave them some feedback on that. And, we're in an environment here, which is, although there is still conservatism and there are still people who are transphobic and homophobic and, racism here is a whole nother issue. But for the most part, we're in a much better position than you all in America. But for me, looking in, it's really sad seeing, I guess, not only the degree that people go to try and limit the freedoms of trans people and limit the rights of trans people in, the South of America, but it's the difference that of kind of, you'll have these places where, you will live where it's relatively liberal and you have, rights and that kind of thing. And then you have somewhere in the South where it's completely flipped. And I think that's really difficult when you're in the same country and it's so, it's so difficult to be, working in these two settings. I think that it makes the situation a lot more complicated. But I mean, for me, when I was traveling, for the World Cups over the last couple of years, America was the place I was the most nervous to go to.
Yeah.
Like I can't, as a point of reference, I can't fly through Saudi Arabia. Most transferring flights from New Zealand go through Saudi Arabia, and it's illegal to be trans there, and it's punishable by death. So although, I wouldn't be executed, I would definitely be deported, and it would be a whole thing. So for me, normally when I fly globally, I have to pass through Singapore. which although it's not illegal, there are no laws protecting trans rights. So if I was to be hate crimed or, have any kind of discrimination leveled at me in that country, I would have no legal defense to be made because of that.
Yeah.
And I was more nervous to be in America than I was to be in Singapore.
Oh, for sure. I'm sorry for stepping on you. I was going to say in some of my travels, and I had some of those feelings as well, right? Like having to go to mainland China, having to go to Vietnam, and not really sure like what my legal status is in these places. And nobody really gave me a shit. But at the same time, yeah, it was definitely in the back of my head the whole time. And but I guess I find it interesting that you say like you're most afraid of America, but like you've raced in the UK and you actually had some of your best racing success up at Fort William. And those of us who are on this call here, we know how, I guess we can say, very pervasive the transphobia is in the UK media culture and how that permeates onto the online community. And we have a lot of hate driven towards us. Did you experience any of that when you were up at Fort Bill?
Honestly, I mean, part of this is, like the I guess the concern that I feel around my personal safety relevant to the type of transphobia that I'm experiencing is quite dependent on the group who are leveling the transphobia at me. I think, for example, I experienced some transphobia from a team manager from one of the World Cup teams while I was racing. And that was really scary because that is someone who has relative power in the industry. And I think that's quite concerning. Whereas, and then going to America, it's like, well, you guys have a lot of guns there. And that's quite concerning.
We have them.
In the UK, it's like, well, what are they going to do? Post mean things about me on Instagram? Like, it's sort of. I think when I was there, I didn't really experience any of the sort of, I guess, rampant turfisms that have been going on. I think really that spiked in the last year or so, and I think when I was there, it was sort of just before that started becoming a problem. It was my first World Cup of the season, and for me, I was far more concerned about trying to race and ride and deal with everything in torrential downpour in my little van than what some crotchety turf is saying about me.
Yeah, no, for sure. And I guess asking, Jessica, you've raced some around the States, and have you experienced anything that would make you scared, that scared you as a trans person, and particularly as a junior? Like, how I'd love to kind of get some thoughts from your side on your experiences.
I mean, I like, besides in cycling, I remember, I mean, it had to do, we were going to nationals in Kentucky, and like, we like, I think, we're like getting pretty close to like our Airbnb or whatever, and like we stopped by like a Waffle House or whatever, and I don't know, like we walked in and like, I don't know,
Waffle House is some good stuff though. I mean,
yeah. So it was some good food, but like I felt like we walked in and everybody just kind of was like went silent. Cause I was probably wearing like my backpack has like rainbow flags on it and all sorts of stuff, and like I don't know, that was real spooky.
No, yeah, and I personally, I guess when I went down to Louisville, I didn't really. That wasn't one of the places that scared me. I think
we weren't in Louisville. We were like just like somewhere in Kentucky.
What I was going to throw out there was just the fact that it's going to some of the other races, and I was going to say where I have felt that personal safety. And actually, I'm going to be honest and say, those of us who are on the call, originally we were going to do this as a live stream. One of the reasons I opted not to do this as a live stream is because I didn't want the potential for anybody to interrupt this, either in person or online, but our personal safeties. And, here I am, I'm at a bike shop. I'm in New York, I'm in Brooklyn, New York, but at the same time, folks are out there who want to hurt us all the time. And but what I was going to say and throw out there is, a couple of years back, I can remember needing to drive to a race. I want to say it was down, it might have been like DCCX or Charm City or something. And it was just as some stuff was hitting. And I can remember being on the phone with USAC on my way down to the race, saying to them, what are you going to do if people show up trying to hurt me or a couple of my friends? Like, what are we doing? Like, you need to have some stances here. You need to take some firm stances about these topics. So I guess it's interesting here. We have, the three of us are talking from a trans feminine experience. And I'd definitely be interested in hearing, I guess, Kieran, asking you, we've traveled a bit together, Kieran, like how is stuff for you traveling, I guess we can say, as a trans masculine person, going to events or going around, going to races, things like that. And some of the, I guess we can say, stuff that's happening around.
Yeah, it's been interesting. Much like you, I transitioned very late in life.
Yes.
I think.
Thanks for calling me old.
I'm older than you, so we're good.
We're in the same time. We have the same racing age, perhaps. So
possibly. I think I'm 45 at this point in time, but
I'm older. Yeah, my racing age is. I think my cross age this year is going to be like 47 or something.
Oh,
that's crazy.
Okay. All right, so I'm a little younger than you.
The estrogen does great stuff, y'all.
But so when I first started racing, I was racing as a woman, and whatever, everything, I was doing what I would normally do in my regular life, and everything was, as normal, I guess, as whatever. And then I was like, oh, this is not how I like my one up my world to be. And it was, I feel like I had a pretty uneventful transition into racing for the men's. Like, I remember I was really nervous because I hadn't started taking testosterone. I hadn't had any top surgery. I just was like, here I am trans, and I'm going to race for the men in the men's, field. And I was like, I don't know, what am I supposed to, I wasn't sure what I was supposed to do. And so I was like asking different trans folks that I knew kind of in the field, but they were all trans women.
Yeah.
They were like, I don't know what trans guys do. And I was like, does anyone know what trans guys, like there's no.
But it's so funny you're saying that, because I had the flip side experience, and I can remember I've lined up to hundreds of races in my life, and probably the first time I lined up in a women's field, that was probably the scariest I'd ever been with lining up. I felt like I didn't know anything, like I didn't know what I was doing. So.
Yeah, I mean, lining up with the men was definitely, I was like, wow, I'm really short, and like they're all really just a lot bigger than I am, but like whatever. Luckily like I said, I was lucky in that I had already been in this local scene for a number of years at that point. And so I feel like I was definitely privileged in that, like, people already knew who I was. I had actually already kind of come out like a year before I started racing with the men. So like even some of the guys in the men's field like already knew. And I also had a few of my friends are on different teams and stuff, and they like mentioned to a couple of the guys on like different teams, like, hey, you know, my friend Kieran's going to be racing, and like, you know, he's trans, and like, you know, just like make him feel, you know, comfortable. And like a couple of guys stood up.
Did they just like chop you in a corner because that,
Yeah, right.
you know, that's
No, but there was definitely like one guy who came over, like as we were, you know, we were all like kind of lining up, and I was like standing there, like, you know, looking up because all the men are like 6 foot tall, and I'm like 5'4", and so but he came over and he was like introduced himself, and I was like, I bet you I know who this. I was like, I know you're the person that like my friend sent over, which it was very nice, and I wish that more people were able to have that kind of experience, because it was like, it definitely was helpful and like wonderful, and you know, I'm sure that I could probably teared up a little bit afterwards. I was like, that was so sweet, you know, and like,
yeah.
but like, you know, that's why I, you know, feel that for me, it's helpful to be out publicly, because then it's like other people can like come to me, and like, or, you know, and working with teenagers, showing that it's okay, and like, you know, that it's not something that is like taboo or terrible, and it's just like, this is just a regular, like, I think that was my scariest part of coming out as trans, was telling the students, because I had been coaching teenagers for like 2 years, and then in the same program, I then became the program coordinator, and so I was, you know, working with them, and so they knew me as my old name, and then I had to explain to them and their parents, like, here's what's going to happen. I'm going to be taking testosterone, and I'm going to be changing my name, and like lots of things are going to change about me. And I can't believe how amazing it was. They were so incredible, and I had so much like support from them.
And the Philly scene too is just,
yeah,
you're also supportive down there, and I love coming to Philly.
Yeah.
And here I am. I'm in New York City. Philly's pretty much the sixth borough, but
right.
y'all down there are just such a great community down there in general for everything bikes, and so just you know, kind of supportive of everything. I guess, you know, piggybacking onto this is the question of, I didn't know how to frame this. Like when I was writing my kind of show notes, and I didn't put this question in there because I didn't know how to frame it, but is to say, and you brought up something which is injecting testosterone, right? Is that I wanted to ask the trans men on the call. I'm almost nervous asking this question, right? It's almost about the fact that the cycling community wants to like actively harm cis men who will inject testosterone, but they want to embrace you trans men who are doing this. And, you know, I know it's quite a bit different, quite honestly, obviously, but I always find that sort of juxtaposition there of saying like, and if I catch shit for literally anti-doping, like taking estrogen and having no testosterone production. I'm just curious from you know, transmasculine perspective, how, you know, has that been a topic at all with any of the folks? And watch, I just blew something up online there. Like they're all going to be coming for you now. Not to say that you're Lance Armstrong or anything, but
I think the biggest, I mean, I have done very few races, probably like less than a handful of races, and none of them were very serious, or like, I think one was licensed and it was called the Fat Santa. That's great. I mean, fat bike race, but anyway, and that was pre testosterone for me, and but I think that the biggest thing is that in this is like a sad piece, I think, in just that cis men and in sports, like the sports world, will never be intimidated by trans men because they still view us through the lens of feminine bodies. And so even though we're taking testosterone, it's the same argument, but backwards for trans women, right? Is that you had the ability, they say, to grow a body with testosterone, right? And that is supposedly different. And the science is all over the place with that, right? And I think leaning more towards that, that the introduction to estrogen or testosterone changes your body composition in either direction, right? But the main point is that cis men don't feel intimidated by us, so they don't care at all that we're taking testosterone. They don't ever think we're going to win or podium, and so we're just not a threat in that sense. And
how does that make you feel?
But it's sad, but it's kind of the truth.
How does that make you? How does that make you feel? Because I find that I have so much empathy for that, what you just said there, because it's it hits home, because at the same time it's like downplay. The cis community wants to downplay everything that my horrible, my beautiful, 56th place race result, right? Actually, it's not 56 other women, 54th place race result, right? But if I can finish DFL, I'm still considered a threat. But yet, like, how does it make you feel, the fact that they're overlooking everything that trans men might be accomplishing on bikes?
Yeah, I mean, I think it sucks, and it feels
Yes.
it feels bad, right? It sucks and it feels bad, but yeah, I always just like, and I'm not ever gonna be a racer. Like I tried, I thought, oh, I would be competitive, and I kind of like that. I like sports. I played sports my whole entire life, but I like just riding bikes, and my thing is more just like, group rides and hanging out and being in the woods, and that's, and a little bit of thrill. but anyway, so I hope for just young people to come up and just like blow them out of the water. Just be like, we are a threat. Watch me, and that's why I like cheer for Chris Mosier so much.
Yeah.
And just like, get it, just because, and to see anyone leveling any playing field, like in the same realm, to see women come up and beat men in like bike packing or like endurance stuff, and I'm like, just to like watch that and see that playing field leveled is like so awesome. I revel in that.
Yeah. You touched on something there, and you said Chris, and talking about Chris Mosier and the stuff he's doing, and the fact he's become such a role model and an icon, right? He's sponsored by Nike, and he's just so amazing and just so poised. And I have so much respect for everything he does. And the couple times I've talked to him, I've always felt like, oh, I'm in this like presence of such an idol, right? And I guess I fangirl a little bit there, but I guess is to ask everybody, and say, who are some of your sporting idols? As trans folks, we don't necessarily have this like this long lineage of trans athletes to kind of look up to. Who were some of the folks you were looking up to? Trans or cis, men, women? I'm curious to get that input. And like, I guess, for example, Kieran, looks like you wanted to say something there. I see you giggling.
Well, when I was growing up, the person that I looked up to had nothing to do with sports at all. It was
okay.
It was and still is Angela Lansbury, hands down my favorite person in the entire world.
I love you so much.
But yeah, like growing up, I mean, I played soccer, I played softball, I did the whole like typical sort of like lesbian whatever, these are my sports and this is what I'm doing. And I don't remember really having like a sports idol.
Yeah.
I don't recall like, I mean, I came out when I was like 18, so I've been out for about 30 years at this point. And but I knew when I was like 6, you know,
Yeah.
I'm like, I don't think boys are all that great, like whatever. Except apparently I felt that I needed to be one, but like, you know, yeah. So, and I feel like now I'm finding out like in the last couple years about all of these like queer like sports icons that I was like, I didn't, you know, like Missy Giove and like all these other people. I'm just like, how did I not know about any of these people? Like, why didn't, you know, I mean, Tony Hawk, I guess would have been, I loved skateboarding, and Tony Hawk was like that would be my sports idol. But
yeah, so you've got the 90s skater hair going there. I can see
right.
But
I'm reliving my youth.
I guess, you know, you and I are definitely from I mean, perhaps an older age is to, I guess, flip this and ask, you know, Kate and Jessica and say, you know, you're a few years younger than some of us on the call here, but who were your idols in sport growing up? And, you know, did you have any trans or queer role models in sport or in life? I guess, Kate, I guess I'll ask you first.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think for me, obviously, when I first started considering racing in the women's field and I heard about Michelle, you know, that was really incredible, you know, that she did what I had set out to do in the same sport that I had set out to compete in. And she had done it, you know, 15 years, 20 years earlier than I had, in a time that, you know, I was not even born at that point. And so for me, that was a really big deal that, you know, she had done this so early. But in terms of kind of, I guess, idols, like, you know, for me growing up as a Kiwi, you know, I was somewhat separate from the, I guess, global sporting world. I mean, you know, we had the world champs for, you know, mountain biking here in, was it like 2006, I think? And
2006.
yeah,
Sam Hill won. I know that because I was working fire.
Yeah, well, I actually had no idea that downhill was a thing until I started competing in it in 2013. So kind of gives you some perspective of my involvement in the sport growing up. So for me, the kind of biggest role model, I would say, in the way I've sort of lived my life and I guess lived my sporting life, but also, you know, things is Sir Edmund Hillary, who was the first person to, well, the first white person with a good media coverage to reach the summit of Mount Everest. And so he, you know, although not a sports person, you know, mountain climbing and exploring and that kind of thing is, I think you could say it's pretty close to sporting in terms of the effort that it takes and the physical elements of it. And, you know, for me, you know, he was someone who, you know, came from New Zealand, which, you know, is about as far from Nepal as it's possible to be, basically. And, you know, did these really incredible things and built these schools in, you know, these parts of the world that really were kind of forgotten by Western culture to some degree. And so I think, you know, the stuff that he did was sort of, you know, by being a leader in, you know, the way that we do things, and also, you know, being someone who's, you know, does something so incredible as climbing the biggest hill in all the hills. So yeah, you know, he was a really big role model for me. But I think in terms of, you know, queer role models, I think, you know, I had so much internalized transphobia and homophobia growing up. It was, you know, a lot of the people that we think of as, you know, queer icons, you know, the God, I can't even think of any of them off the top of my head, how bad it is. But like growing up, you know, I was like, oh, that's weird. Why would two men want to kiss each other? Ooh.
And now we know. We all
yeah. You know, I'm like, oh, two ladies in a wedding. And now I'm like,
no, I get it. And I think all of us have sort of internalized that some. And I guess the reason I wanted to pose that sort of question out there to folks is the fact that there are now some notable people. There's some notable people in sport who, I guess they're notable for their past accomplishments. They're not really relevant right now, but they have been horribly transphobic, and they have really been driving the conversation in a really negative way. And but then on the flip side of that, there are some other people who have been really standing up for the trans community, and you see what like a Megan Rapinoe is doing, and what the voice that they have and the platform they have, far beyond what anybody in cycling seems to have, especially like for you and I in that mountain bike sense, or being Jessica in that cyclocross sense. So I guess I don't even know where I want to go with that question. So who knows there? But I guess it's just talking about role models and the fact that we're almost asked to be role models as trans people. And how have you had that kind of that personal have you had that personal engagement yet? Have people come up to you and say like, hey, I'm trans, and has that happened to you yet? Anybody here on
Definitely for me,
Yeah.
I think it's sort of, I think at least in the mountain biking sphere, I think that for most people who are mountain biking now, particularly in downhill, which is, I guess a big part of the sort of mountain biking media, we see on Pink Bike and social media and that kind of thing, a big part of that is downhill. So I think that a lot of people who are riding today have kind of come in, in the mid to late 2000s and, into the early 2010s. And as a result, I think a lot of them had never heard of Michelle. And as a result, I think for a lot of people, I'm the first trans woman, in the mountain biking community that they've ever heard of. It's the first trans person they've ever heard of, period. And so I think for a lot of people, I get messages on my social media, and I, know people who are, young and trans and, want to be competing. And it's really interesting seeing, hearing from those people and having that kind of perspective that, when I first came out and I first decided to be openly out about my identity, in the community and not being stealth, I was like, oh yeah, I want to be, open and honest and, make this space for future generations. But I kind of didn't think it was actually, I was making the space that I was like, well, so they'll deal with it when they come around. I'll do my bit now, and then in a decade, someone else will come through and maybe their life will be a bit easier. But, now that I have, young trans people who are, wanting to compete in, particularly in New Zealand, but also internationally, and they, want my opinion on, whether or not they should make the swap or how to deal with people who have, dissenting opinions of them. And it was a lot of things I kind of wasn't really prepared for. I think, it's sort of, it's funny in downhill, I think maybe more so than some other areas of professional cycling, like cross country or road racing, we really are kind of just doing it because we love it. There is, so little money, and
there's no negative money.
Like nothing. Like I've had 2 World Cup podiums, in 2019, which is when I was last racing. I finished, I think, like 7th or 8th overall in the world. So, pretty high up. And I think the only thing I've ever got in terms of like professional sort of outcome of my racing was this t-shirt. So, it's kind of, as sports
totally
go,
feel you.
It's very like, it's a passion-based sport. And so, even the highest athletes in the sport, the Loic Brunis, the Aaron Gwynns, are all pretty down-to-earth people. And I think that as a result, when you go into the sport, you don't kind of think of yourself as someone who could be a role model. I remember the first person who ever asked for a photo with me, I was like, why? So, I think it's really, it's hard to kind of make that realization that although you say you want to be a role model, when you actually do become a role model for people, it's like, well, how do I actually do that?
And I guess that's a question too. Like I've struggled with that myself, because I certainly don't consider myself a role model. I feel like such the worst role model you can ever consider in the trend side of stuff, just because I'm a loudmouth and I'm I'm a rabble rouser. But yeah, it's funny. I think I'm going to say like probably 9/10 of the questions of people who come to me with trans related questions, it's always like asking me questions about, hey, what hormones are you on? What did you take? Because they're trying to just navigate their way through like either, USA Cycling or UCI policy and so honestly, I don't know why I type it out every time. I should just copy and paste it at this point, because it's probably every couple of weeks I'm getting, some questions from folks. So I guess to, bring it back around, I wanted to ask Jessica, who do you look up to in bike world right now? Who are your idols right now? I'd like to hear this from a junior perspective, a kid's perspective.
I mean, like for me, definitely, well, in the US at least, definitely like Katie Compton and Ellen and like, yeah, I guess that's it. But
no, there's some.
I mean, there's definitely more. I just my brain.
There's obviously, yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
the American women sleigh didn't cross. So.
Oh yeah. And then also definitely like Celine. Like Celine's, I don't know. I really hope one day to meet Celine. Like, she's so cool.
I hope to see you racing against Celine. I can't wait.
That
to
would
see
be
that.
sick.
And that's actually, it's an awkward pivot, but I wanted to talk about the fact that Celine is such a excellent representative for the BIPOC community and specifically for Black women in cycling, and I feel really guilty having this call with everybody. And like, it's not to say I feel guilty for any of you. I thank you so much for being on this call, but it's more about the fact that I have several Black friends in cycling, and I know some Black trans women, but I don't know Black trans cyclists. And I almost feel like we're not doing service to the discussions today without talking about the fact that, and I realize it's delicate to talk about this because we are white folks talking about this in America, but the need to make this not just cycling community welcoming to trans people, but the need to make cycling and the trans people who are in cycling welcoming to Black and brown BIPOC faces and voices in our trans cycling community. And I guess to throw it out there and see, like, anybody's, and maybe I'm just riffing here, but is anybody's thoughts on some of that? And I guess I'll throwing it to Kieran, and I'm asking you this, Kieran, because you're down in Philly, and Philly. Every time I go to Philly, I get inspired just by the community that's in Philly in general, but the amount of just very, like, the involvement of the Black trans community in Philly is very just inspiring in general to me, and giving me hope that the trans community can grow beyond, well, the trans cycling community can grow beyond the fact that it's just white faces, and it just, yeah, kind of beat me up there. And to ask you, like, as far as the trans community in Philly, are there cyclists down there, and what did I do wrong here, I guess, is to ask the question. I didn't really ask a question, I guess, but it's more, and I hate to like put you on the spot of saying, oh, you're in Philly there like that. And that's really, horrible of me in that way, but it's more to say I realize that there's this intersection of two great cycling, like a cycling community and trans community. And am I missing something? And do I need to open my eyes to more communities here? And how can I do that? I feel responsible.
It's not all on your shoulders. But I think the conversation is definitely important to have. And I think like inclusion of Black cyclists and brown cyclists is kind of on us on white people to bring that, not to bring them into the fold, but to make the space not just accepting and inclusive, but also safe. Like if we're not feeling, if like us as white trans cyclists don't feel safe at a race or at a gravel ride or at a group ride, then how are Black and brown people, whether they're trans or not, how are they going to feel safe? Because we're already feeling like out of, so it's just like, I think it's one of those things where like you have to start really small. Like you can't, like if you try to, you're in Brooklyn, Christopher's in Vermont, Jessica's up in Massachusetts, Kate's down in New Zealand. And so like we're so spread apart. But like once you start with like your small community, and then like you have to grow that, and like you were working in Brooklyn, Christopher's working in Vermont, I'm doing stuff in Philly, and then eventually it like grows, and then and like I feel like interwebs and social media stuff is really helpful to do that, because you can grow your sort of connections. Like one of my students was just in the Abundance Summit. Sasha. Aisha reached out to me, and I almost had a heart attack. I got the email, and I was like, "Oh my god!" I was by myself at work, and I was like screaming because I was like,
I told Aisha the other day. I was talking on the phone with Aisha, and I told her, it's like, I felt so guilty the fact that I couldn't like tune in because I was at work during that time, but I definitely and it's something I need to go back, and I need to watch that content.
Yeah, it was so good. I was only able to watch the first full day, but it was great because I like had it on at work, and I work by myself, so it was like just in the background. But like I feel like it's a very difficult thing, because it's not just like one factor of like saying, hey, our ride's inclusive, everyone join. It's also getting the word out. It's also making sure that everyone on the ride or at the race, or or at least the majority of the people, are going to be inclusive and accepting. And you're gonna, there's gonna be people that you're gonna need, people who are gonna like, if there's somebody who's being a jerk, or just misogynistic or transphobic or whatever, then you have to, there's going to be someone that has to like run interference so they can, so there's all these like factors that you kind of have to like work around. And
so I think what you're getting at there, and you said something that really kind of got some thought rolling for me there, is to say that, and pulling this back, and I kind of forgot that we're recording right now, actually, and we're recording this to put out to the world. Oh my gosh. But and most of the people who are going to listen to this are cis, right? What are some things, and I get asked, and I probably had 10 different people, and I love you all, my cis friends, who dropped into my DMs today and said, what can I do for you today? Because I know this BS with Arkansas and USA Cycling, and I didn't have anything for them, but what can they do to make space, to make this a warm and welcoming community? I guess I'll let me ask Christopher first. Like, Christopher, you are doing it up there, and you're helping create community up in Vermont. What are some of the things you're doing there that somebody who is perhaps putting on a group ride in Austin, Texas, or somebody who's in Tucson, Arizona, or somebody who's, up in Washington, what are some things that you've learned that these folks who are listening at home or on the car and sharing wherever you are to take home and do to make a more welcoming space for trans folks and every other slice of, I guess we can say, the underrepresented communities in cycling?
Sure. I think the most important piece, so I participate in a lot of different group rides, both through the bike shop that I work at and then through Pride Rides, of course, which is, very two kind of different. Those two are actually kind of similar because my bike community through the bike shop is also filled with a lot of queer people and a lot of really great allies. So I'm pretty fortunate with that. But I think what makes those group rides so inclusive is that the people who are leading them and the people who are inviting other people to come out, they're educated. They know things about trans people, about queer people, and so I think the number one thing is to educate yourself a little bit. That way you can if there are people on the ride who don't know or ask offensive things or say offensive things, you can in turn educate them instead of putting the onus on the queer person, and so that is, I think, a really important piece to know. To be a good ally is to sometimes step in that. And I know that all of my cis or hetero allies here would do that like that. They put in the work. They know.
Yes, for sure. And along those lines, and I guess I can say, down to Kate, you're all the way across the globe, and what is being done down, and I know that the mountain bike scene in particular down in New Zealand is always just, it's hot, right? Like it has so many people riding, but are things being done to make it a more inclusive space, generally speaking, down your way?
I think it's difficult. I think that in New Zealand, we have a very different situation to what you'll have in America. Obviously, the sort of, I guess, systematic racism, for example, dealing with, non-white people we have here is very different because, our native population, the Māori people were, I guess, colonized in a very different way, which, although that doesn't mean there isn't, institutionalized racism here, there absolutely is. It does mean that, we didn't really have a, large portion of our population being enslaved up until, somewhat recently. I think that is not really part of our history. And so as a result, I think there are less initiatives, particularly in sport, to push people for, forward from, non-white communities to compete in sport. I think that, I know plenty of, non-white people who compete in mountain biking here. A great example of that would be Tara Seplavy, who he's a junior rider who competes, who recently won in 2019 won a World Cup in the junior men's field. I believe won Val de Sol. And that's really amazing and incredible that we have that here. But I definitely do think that because we're such a small country, you kind of don't get the crossover in the communities as much as you do maybe in America. I think that the number of trans people I know who compete in sports here is very low. I think that, I'm the only high level trans athlete in New Zealand that I sort of know of. I think it's me and Laurel Hubbard are basically the only high level trans athletes in New Zealand. And I think that it's difficult to go, we need to be, putting rules and putting initiatives in place to help, improve the, I guess, space in, cycling for, BIPOC trans people when there are just almost no trans people in the sports to begin with.
Or even but even queer folk, or are they, maybe it's obviously America is, we're uniquely American, right? In the fact that we have all these things that are very Americanized. But I'm just curious, just the fact that your culture, the riding culture, specifically riding culture, is so it always seems to be so inclusive from an outsider looking into New Zealand, as far as everybody rides and so many people are into the sport. And
I definitely, I think that it's sort of, it's difficult because,
Okay.
you know, obviously a lot of my experiences, particularly with the downhill, where it is still a very masculine sport, and, you know, it's populated by, you know, the sort of, I guess, New Zealand equivalent of conservatives, who generally aren't particularly conservative. You know, the kind of New Zealand opinion on just about everything is, does it affect me? No, I don't care then.
It's still to the left of it. It's still, your right is still,
Yeah,
you know,
but
to the left
there
of
is-
our left.
Yeah, but there's definitely still, you know, people using slurs a lot, you know, kind of, you know, using, for example, gay in a negative connotation.
Yeah.
I think that's really common, particularly among younger athletes. But I think that it's a tendency that those views are pervasive among the younger people.
Okay.
I think as people grow up in New Zealand, people tend to, particularly in the communities I'm in, tend to become more liberal. And as a result, I think that, you know, there are generally more, you know, sort of, I guess, initiatives, and people are more supportive of, you know, queer people. I mean, it was really funny when, you know, I was first thinking about changing over categories, and a few people knew that I was trans in the riding community, but I hadn't sort of formally started racing. The North Island Downhill Series, which is a pretty popular racing series in New Zealand, the organizer of that, he put in a non-binary category. No one has ever competed in the non-binary category, but there is one. If anyone did want to race in it, you could be a non-binary competitor in downhill in New Zealand. And
that actually shows something. I didn't know that, and I find that amazing. Right? Is that all this talk, and this happens in America every single time you're hearing about it, is that but men are just going to decide they're going to go race as women, or they're going to compete as women, they're going to run as women, swim as women, whatever. You have a non-binary category there, and literally nobody's doing it. It's not this is not something that people
by default. Like, if you really wanted to win, you could go be non-binary and win by default. Like, there's no rules gatekeeping that category.
And I think that's an excellent. I love this. Now I know this like little nugget of knowledge that I can use in these discussions. But yeah, it's just this fallacy that this is going to happen. And I guess it's like, how do we move this forward? And one thing I was thinking to kind of, you know, start to, you know, bring this whole thing home here for us today is just to, as I had said off the top of this is my fourth day of trans visibility before, for me, coming out 4 years ago. But I was looking back through some of my social media posts from over the years, Trans Day visibility. I noticed that I keep on saying the same thing, and I keep on having this optimism that something is going to get better. And here I am today, and it's not getting better, I guess. But if we could say optimistically, you know, a year from now, what do we want to be talking about when we have this phone call a year from now? When you all come back to my my X number episode and we talk about this again, where do you want the conversation to be a year from now? And I'll ask you, Kate, since I can see you here on my screen first.
Really, I think in a year from now, we should be talking about the hard-hitting topics that are affecting trans people across the globe today, like pancakes or waffles.
Well, Jessica said before Waffle House, and if you haven't been to this institution that we have in America called Waffle House, yeah, if you're up here, check it out. It's quite a place.
Yeah. Point is, I think that it is really hard when every time there are these, you know, group discussions that involve, you know, trans and queer people, the talking points that we're talking about is the, you know, latest hate crime, or, you know, negative legislation, or, you know, it's like every time I had a good finish at a World Cup, the conversations that I was dealing with were, oh, how do you feel about the hate you get? How are you dealing with all the backlash that's a result of this? No one's having a conversation about how cool it is that a female rider from New Zealand has got the first World Cup podium in nearly a decade.
Yes.
Like, that should be the topics that we are talking about in these discussions. It should be the celebration of, and I mean, I say that it would be good to talk about that, and I don't think we should be, ignoring the bad stuff in favor of the celebrations, but rather there shouldn't be the bad stuff, and we should be focusing on the good stuff instead. And I think that's where it would be great if things were in a year. I mean, they're not, but
yeah, and that's what I guess I can, optimistically, and that's what I mean. I look back on my post this morning and I went, oh wow, I'm talking about the same shit 4 years in a row. What do I want to talk about? And I haven't even made a post yet because of that. But I guess we can say, asking everybody else, like, hey, Jess, where do you want to see optimism here? Like, where do you want to see us talking a year from now about transport?
I mean, I really hope that we can have more like athletes of color, like trans athletes of color, talking with us. That's kind of what I'm hoping for, because that is like, I feel like a lot of violence, like when trans violence is talked about, a lot of it is directed at trans people of color.
That's true.
And like, I think that I really hope that we'll have some trans people of color just chilling with us, talking.
I want, and I'm going to make that my personal objective. Like I'm going to say that, and it's not just saying I'm going to make that happen in a year. I need to be making that happen a lot sooner, personally. I guess flipping it up to Vermont and asking Chris, like, hey, where do you want to be a year from now in our discussion?
I also want to be celebrating. I want to see some positive things. I mean, I think a lot of my focus is here in the United States, and so I think I'd like to see some change on a federal level, protections for trans people, so that we can celebrate those wins. I remember, like, when gay marriage was legalized in the United States and like in Vermont, even, like, I was pretty I was like in high school or something, or around there, and that being like such a like amazing moment. And so those, I'd love to see those sorts of protections, and be celebrating that, and having trans youth not have to worry about whether or not they can participate.
And Kieran, how about yourself? Like, we're the two old folks on this call, this podcast here. Yeah, we're the golden oldies, but where they have their youthful optimism. What do you have to?
I think I'm sharing actually all of the youthful optimism, and I feel like my hope is sort of a conglomeration of what everyone has already said, whereas like I would love to be celebrating some positive accomplishments, and in legislation, and whether with cycling, with just the kind of world in general, where there's like maybe a page has turned where people are like, oh, it's people are starting to like stand up more for trans rights, and that we're having that positive conversation with other trans athletes of color. That would be fantastic. And how, like just sort of bringing it all together. And
yes. And I'm going to say my thoughts on this one, because I've now had the whole day to think about this, is I want to see somebody who was supposed to be on this call, Chelsea. I want to see Chelsea rock star at the Olympics. I hope I hope she gets that opportunity, and I want to see Chelsea on my TV, right? I want to see that if legislation is not changed promptly, I want to see that world championship out of Arkansas, right? Like, I want to have talked about, I want to come back here in a year and talk about the fact that we went someplace that didn't have laws on the books that were out for us, and we're able to go there and safely and feel confident and safe to go spectate this event in my favorite discipline of cycling. And to echo what everybody, my personal goal is, I want there to be more community, like more representation within our community, inside the trans community. It's like, yes, I realize we are talking about a very small group, but it's important to us, and I think that we just all shared that part of it. So, I guess that was that wrap for. But what I'm going to do now is let's go around the table. I want everybody to let's close this out big. This is the last bell lap right now. Give me some final words, and if you want to give a shout out to your sponsors. Drop your social media tags right now. This is your opportunity. I'll lead this off and say, Jessica, you want to give any shout outs to your sponsors, or tell people where they can find you, or any words of wisdom?
I mean, I just want to say thank you to Jam Fund for all their help with the grants and being part of the team. Also, I have a YouTube channel called Jessica Fall, and yeah, that doesn't have to do with cycling, but it's fun, and anyways.
And Jessica's an amazing artist. I've heard your music too. Your parents have let me hear your music. So. Christopher, final thoughts?
Yeah, I don't have any sponsors, but I guess I would give a big shout out to my biggest allies in cycling is Vermont Bicycle Shop, and my friends Darren and Ginger there, who own the shop and have really helped create a really inclusive cycling community here in Vermont, and really helped me put Pride Rides into the world and develop that as well. And so if you're ever in Vermont, come ride with us. Through Pride Rides.
I need to come back to Vermont, but
yes,
everybody's got to get vaccinated before I can come up to
Oh,
Vermont.
yeah.
So that's another thing. I want that to happen within the so that next year we're not talking about having a socially distanced get together.
For sure.
Kieran, any shout outs that you want to give?
I also don't have any sponsors, so I'll say thank you for inviting me to this, Tara. It was awesome, and it was nice to sort of meet everybody. And also, I would like to give props to the people on my team, Velo Dash, which has been they're just awesome. I mean, I helped choose most of the folks that are on that team, but they're all wonderful people, and they're very supportive, and definitely helped with a lot of my transition stuff, and just getting sober and all that good stuff.
You have a rad team down there.
Yeah,
Kate, do you have any final words of wisdoms or any shout outs to your sponsors? Where can we find Kate on the internet?
Yeah, I think this, this panel that we've done today, I think more than anything, and this is, I think, the biggest misconception I see among cis people when they talk about trans people, is this idea that we are a conglomerate group where we're all the same person, we all look the same, we all act the same, we'll talk the same. And I think that is so not true. And I think that there is just as much, variety of people and personalities, in the LGBTQ community as there are in any other community globally. And, that's as true among, trans cyclists as any group. And I think that, we all bring such different perspectives and life experiences to what is essentially, sitting on two wheels and rolling around. I think that's so, and it's so cool that we get to do this kind of thing and, you know, be able to bring these different, you know, views and opinions together and, you know, create this kind of content. And so, you know, I really am grateful to everyone here today for getting involved with this and, you know, doing this because, you know, we can't do these kinds of things without people who are willing to do them. So, yeah. And I think kind of also going off that point, I think, you know, I'm not normally one to, you know, talk about my sponsors, but I think, you know, for me, the brands that do stand with me, I am so grateful for them for standing with me because there are so many companies who I have spoken to and they've gone, oh, well, you know, we would love to support you and we really stand by what you're doing, but you're just too controversial for us to be involved with. And as a result, you know, at the level that I compete in, I struggle to find any support. So the support I can get is, you know, hugely important for me. So, you know, Liat
Yes.
have been incredible. Da Vinci and Maxis kind of are the three big ones for me who've been, you know, really supportive. But, you know, Action Down Under, or ADU, are an importer in New Zealand, and they've been incredible and helped me more than I can ever sort of say thank you to. And they aren't involved in the queer community at all, but they just don't care, and
They support you as a racer.
Exactly. And I think that is so important. And there, you know, need to be more people who support athletes like us for being athletes. And, you know, I think that you know, goes a long way in the sporting community. You know, I think for us, we have to, the change in the community needs to be from the top down, and the industry people need to be the ones who are making those changes. You know, if we see trans people on factory teams, that gets the support and the change that we need in the sport.
Excellent. Thank you very much. So, everybody at home who might be listening, as I said at the top of the show, if you have any questions, comments for us, if you have anything that you want to ask the specific guests who are on our show, please drop me an email, info@pinkbluewhite.cc, or drop me a social media at pinkbluewhite.cc on Instagram or Twitter. And I will be sure I feed that question on to any of the panelists today. And if they're able to, they'll get back to you. And because we are a community, and I want to say this to all the trans folks who might be listening, I am here for you. I know the folks on this panel are here for you. We're a community, and cis folks as well. You're our community. We're your community. And if you have questions for us, we're here to ask. We're here to answer them for you. So again, huge thanks for everybody who joined us today. Everybody who's on the panel. This is a memorable first, and as I said, hopefully not last podcast. And I need to get better at this, but I will. And thank you for each and every one of you who are listening at home, at work, on the train, sitting on the trainer, sitting on Zwift, doing nothing, but listening to us. I really appreciate it. So also, I want to give a big shout out to John and Doug from the Gravel Lot, who are on the back end of this production right now, helping put this whole shebang together. So they're doing all the hard work on the back end to make this look and sound great, and definitely, hopefully, making me look great there, John and Doug. But I really, truly could not have pulled this together without their help and their support and their encouragement over the last couple of weeks. So so be sure, Gravel Lot. Be sure to check out thegravellot.com on the web and social media, and tune into the Gravel Lot live stream every Tuesday at 6:30 p.m. Eastern Time for the Americans on YouTube, Twitch, Facebook, and Streamlabs. Or you can download a new episode of the Gravel Lot podcast every Thursday from wherever you get your podcasts from. Additionally, Pink Blue White podcast is recorded live from Sun and Air Bicycles in Brooklyn, New York. Located steps away from the Williamsburg Bridge at the corner of Driggs and South 4th, Sun and Air is the premier cycling store in Williamsburg, Brooklyn. Open 7 days a week, noon to 7 on weekdays, 11 to 5 on weekends. Here at Sun and Air, we carry a great selection from Tokyo Bike, Jamis, Surly, All City, Linus, Bianchi, as well as a finely curated selection of parts and accessories, as you see right behind me on the wall, from the likes of Thousand, Brooks, Velo Orange, and tons of others. So check them out online at sunandair.nyc. And finally, this would not be a cycling podcast without giving a shout out to our friend and loyal supporter of Everything Bike, Dan at Grimper Brothers Coffee. So follow the link in the show notes. Head to grimperbrothers.com right now. Get your hands on some amazing coffee from somebody who supports good causes in cycling to make a greater world. So be sure to check that out. And thank you for everybody. Also, thank you for the intro and outro music from Distemper. You can find their music and lots of other royalty-free tunes over at freemusicarchive.org. And I want to thank you again. Everybody at home, have a good one, and talk to you next time.